Oh yeah, Zanele, amazing I think is an understatement, especially when we take into account this conversation that needs to be had. I don't know if you'd use the word amazing, but definitely going to put an alert in your mind because South Africa is in the grip of a drug abuse crisis and our young people are most at risk. Now listen to this, a recent study and recent data from the South African Community Epidemiology Network on drug use shows that cannabis, crystal meth and heroin continue to dominate treatment admissions among young, with the average age of first-time use now just 12 years old. Yes, you are hearing this correctly.
That is so harrowing, Raul, but thank you for bringing us that information. We'll delve into it with our special guest today, but let me tell you that it's not just the youth. The Department of Social Development reports that nearly 1 in 5 South Africans aged 15 and older have used an illicit substance at some point in their lives, and the ripple effects extend to families and also communities, as well as their schools.
Whew, this is crazy stuff indeed. So obviously we had to bring in one of the finest, and we're going to be joined by psychologist Charles Davids to unpack the emotional, the social, and the psychological roots of addiction during Sanka Drug Awareness Week. And I've got to say, Charles, thank you so much for joining us in this conversation. How are you doing?
I'm well, thank you. It's always a pleasure. I'm not sure about the topic.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure to talk about that, but that's the reality in our country.
Much needed conversation nonetheless, man.
Absolutely.
So thank you for being here for this.
Yeah, so I'm going to touch base with the fact that Raul, of course, raised, which I think is incredibly scary, but also a reality that many of us face in South Africa. 12 years old is the average age for first use.
Yeah.
That is something that we need to unpack here. So what kind of emotional context are you seeing behind this fact? Why so young?
So we have to understand the kind of context around our communities that we have. And we cannot exclude the whole kind of thing around gang culture, but all gang culture within our communities, but also how families are struggling. Because for me, the underlying fact with everybody that I treat for addiction is around, I always say the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's actually connection.
Oh, wow. I love that.
And that is, I think, where we struggle a lot with, where there's not a lot of connection in terms of whether it's a personal connection with the self or the kind of, interrelational kind of things. And we see that a lot within families. And I think that's why. So people, young people use drugs to cope. They always say to me, it's to calm myself. And it quiets my mind. And it's all of those kind of things playing out within community or family.
Sure.
I love that topic you meant about that connection, because I think that brings on that positive stimulation. But I think we still have these sort of views, and especially with families, that I would say that addiction is somewhat of a moral failure. Right? And you see these thoughts playing out quite a bit and these judgments that go around. How do we change this perception and sort of hold people accountable to the damage being done here?
So it's nothing to do with morals, because you find even in very religious families, we see these young people. And remember, when we hit the kind of teenage years, we will experiment with things. I mean, that's almost a natural development. If you don't experiment, there's almost something wrong with different kind of things. I'm not only speaking about drugs in this sense. And therefore, it will always be that. The difference is, I think, when I certainly grew up, the experimentation with different kind of things were very different. It might have been cigarettes or alcohol, but nowadays, and then it became marijuana and dacha as we know it. But now, I mean, it's heroin or crystal meth.
Hard, heavy impacting substances, yeah.
Because it's easy accessible. I mean, extremely easy accessible on whether it's on the Cape Flats, but not only the Cape Flats, even our small rural communities in the Western Cape these days. We see that because of easy accessibility, and it's becoming cheaper. So it's not that expensive. People think it's
affordable, accessible.
It's very affordable. It's accessible. And quite available in different kind of spaces.
Sure. Yeah, sure. Okay, you mentioned that a lot of people that come to you to seek help talk about quieting their minds and calming down. And to me, that speaks about a pain that they are going through. So what exactly are people experiencing right now? What is this human condition that we can speak to?
Well, so I always say that if you look at a lot of our communities, we can diagnose a whole community with either PTSD. If you, just think about it. So if we have a lot of gang violence and shootings, And I mean, there's a study that's been done many years ago where it's if toddlers, just in terms of noise levels, they lose impulse control. Just noise. I'm not even talking about domestic violence or things, just noise. And if you think about it, I remember when, I mean, I grew up in Bishop Lavis, and when I moved to Kuils River, I couldn't sleep the first 3 months because it's so quiet.
Sure.
Now, just the basic kind of things like that, where it is about that, the busyness, the noise, the violence. And if I can diagnose a community with either depression, any mood or anxiety disorder, and PTSD, then one can understand why there's more young people starting to use it, because it's to deal with those kind of things. And we're not treating those kind of areas. We expect a youngster to go to school, and I say to teachers a lot of times on a Monday morning, you cannot start a lesson in a primary school setting because there was a lot of shooting over the weekend. You first have to normalize that for the kids before you can even start teaching.
Yeah.
And most teachers don't do that because they don't stay in that community. They're not aware of what those kids went through. And then it's about, we expect them to just to act normal and to be able to function normally.
Yeah, sure. This is proper. And again, Mzansi, this is the reality of the situation we are in South Africa, and a pertinent conversation that must be had. We're going to continue this in a part 2 and maybe talk about some of the ways that we can assist and provide some positive impact. But for now, let's keep it positive. A little break, and we'll be back with this conversation. Zanele, I hear you got something to plug us in with some good stuff. What do you got?
It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Welcome back. It is your Feel Good Breakfast Show. Now, we got started on this conversation a couple minutes ago, but we have to continue with the part 2 because addiction doesn't end with one person, all right? It disrupts entire families, school systems, and generational cycles. But with support and also with understanding, healing is definitely possible and also sustainable. So in the second part of our convo this morning with psychologist Charles Davids, it's going to help us unpack what recovery looks like in real life and how to support someone through it even when they relapse.
Yeah, sure. And the fact that we're talking about not just adults in recovery, but kids in recovery, young minds, this is a time in a child's life where they are the most impressionable, where the most effect and impact and trauma can be had and experienced. What's your experience like in terms of the mind of a child or mind of some of these youngsters coming to you, either asking for help or you seeing them need this help?
See, most of the time, if it's youngsters like that, they're not the ones reaching out for the help.
Yeah.
They don't even realize they need the help because that's the norm within communities.
Oh, wow, okay.
So it's either what happens is that there's referrals through school systems. They go to school, they pick up these kind of things, they bring in the social workers or psychologists within the education department, and that's where sometimes those referrals come from. And when they do even the home visits, you realize it's not only the child that's on drugs, it's then the parents as well. And that becomes the difficulty because now you have to treat the whole family. But also the difficulty, if you look at the mental health services within the state service, a lot of our adolescent units are filled up with substance-induced psychosis. We're not even talking about mood and anxiety disorders because they take up most of the beds within that. And that becomes the difficulty because it also clogs up the health system.
And the capacity there.
And the capacity for that, but also, even if you know the person needs to get treatment immediately, there's no beds available. You know, so there's a waiting list for those kind of beds for to book, and from adolescents to adults.
Sure.
It's not only and it puts a lot of strain on the system, and I mean it costs a lot of money to do that kind of treatment, and therefore we have to more clearly look at what is the preventative things that we have to do. You can't. Because otherwise we just deal with the symptoms of what is happening, and therefore we need to almost go back to much more preventative work. And how we, even if I look at how NPOs are funded around addiction treatment. So social development will offer funding to an NPO only for early intervention. But what about the prevention, the early intervention, the treatment, and importantly, the aftercare, because you're referring to relapse.
Yeah.
Relapse is part of treatment. Because at some point, and think about it, so we take, it's like a washing machine model. We put dirty clothes in, it comes out clean. But if you think about it, we send somebody for rehab. They come back out. But they stay next to the drug merge, and that's a trigger.
The environment's
The
the same.
environment has not changed, the friendship groups hasn't changed, and therefore the relapse will happen. And that's why I'm saying the aftercare is also important.
Walking out with your all whites into the mud, you're going to get mud on you.
You go,
It's
it's inevitable.
Yeah.
You did speak about friends, and I wonder
Yeah.
how important your community, your friends group around you, and peer pressure, what impact does that have on your recovery?
Listen, hugely so, because if you look at normal development, when young people become adolescents, peers are more important than adults in their life, including their parents. They don't listen to adults, they listen to peer groups.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, so in treatment, we would say you have to change your friendship group. And I mean, it's not easy to make
Right.
friends.
Yeah.
You come out and now you have to change friendship group. Where you're going to find the new friends, because that's the community that you stay in. But therefore I'm saying we need to look at a system way of treating it. This is where sports clubs, religious organizations, churches, youth groups and things must play a vital role. Because if I need to change my friendship to a more positive one, then surely those structures that in the community must assist with that.
Yeah, providing
They must
an
be
alternative.
part of treatment. They can't stand outside of it and say, no, it's an individual problem. It's a societal issue.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I think when we look at it, it always works from the ground up. I mean, we need the schools to be a part of this. We need this change to happen at home. If we could create any impact, and lastly, some words of wisdom, especially for those that might be seeing this or worried or concerned about a loved one, what are the options? What should they do?
It's to reach out for help immediately. I mean, if you have a child, it doesn't matter where in the country you stay, you have to educate yourself on addiction. What is the drugs on the market and things? Because I can tell you, it doesn't matter which school your child attends, the drugs are there. So you have to educate yourself what the symptoms are so that you can see that in your child. And I mean, with children, we see the behavior change immediately, then you know something is not okay. And then you have to step in immediately, because the sooner we see it, the better it is for treatment, because it's worse to get somebody into rehab for inpatient treatment than to when they start experimenting to deal with what those kind of things is. But I always say, if we take the drug away, what do we replace it with? And that's the connection part that I'm talking about. What are the traumas that we do? Because sometimes we treat addiction, but we're not treating the trauma.
Yeah.
And it's important that we all, I mean, I always say GPs and public health officials, nurses, things in day hospitals and things, we have to assess for addiction everyone that we see. We can't just think it's not happening, because sometimes the addiction is just a symptom and we send people for rehab but not dealing with the underlying symptoms of it.
Ooh, well, that's
powerful.
it right there. I love that you've mentioned that, because yes, drug use is often a symptom of something deeper, trauma, pain, and even disconnection, like Charles mentioned. And thank you so much for coming through, sharing your pearls of wisdom. And I really hope that we provided some sort of relief and help for somebody. In fact, the helpline is on the screen right now. So if you are looking for support or even recovery, know that it's possible, and you can go ahead and call that helpline that you see on screen right now from the Sanka branch.